to see you.
So we're going to do a couple of things here.
Yeah.
At TYT, we're going to launch something called Operation Hope, and that's just getting the community together.
Love it.
And we're going to basically get caught trying. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to try to do all sorts of different things, including passing legislation from the outside, which seems near impossible. It seems near impossible from the inside, right? But one of the things we'd love to talk to you about is outside of the context of the normal news. You normally come on the show, talk about a bill or something else that's happening, is how do things work?
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of people have no idea how Congress works and what's possible and not possible and how to get it done. So let's start with the beginning, okay? When the Democrats are out of power in the House, is there anything you can do in the House to push legislation forward?
Well, there are two avenues. One is to look for narrow wins on bipartisan issues. Those are things like effective use of government agencies to have better services, right? Or figuring out how do we bring certain types of manufacturing back that are critical to the United States. But in terms of the big stuff, the only way we can do it is if the McCarthy makes a concession to Democrats. So that requires him having Democratic votes. So far, they haven't needed them for anything they've done. They've been able to pass things on partisan Republican votes, but we're in a unique situation. So if they come to Democratic votes, then we can have some leverage on saying, here's what we need.
So, Ro, I'm not sure that the American people even understand that if the Republicans control the House or the Senate, they have complete power over what is introduced as...
Complete power in the House, not in the Senate, but in the House they do.
Yeah.
So McCarthy gets to decide what vote he can bring to the floor. So let's say, we discussed paid family leave. So the most simple idea, I work 80-hour weeks, but if I need to be there for my family or kids, I can, right, as a member of Congress. I may work 100-hour weeks, but I have total control. If tomorrow, right now, I want to say, Cenk, we're done, I got to go be with my kids, I'm going to go do that. Most Americans don't have that. And so we're saying, no, they need to have paid family leave. That's 80% or so approval. If you put it on a floor vote, it would probably pass. The problem is you can't put it on a floor vote because McCarthy gets to decide what goes on the floor.
So in the Senate, is it different?
Senate is different. Senators have more power to be able to bring things for a vote. Schumer has a lot of say. But the Senate, there's the filibuster. So you bring something and you got to get a 60 votes. And it's mind-boggling you haven't been able to get 60 votes in the Senate for paid family leave.
Yeah, I mean, we start with paid family leave because it's at 84%, to your point about being above 80, and 74% of Republicans want it. And so, Ro, I know that you know this, but do the people in Congress understand, generally speaking, that when something that has 84% popularity is near impossible to pass, that the country gets enormously frustrated and feels like the government is completely broken?
I think people don't understand the anger at Congress. They don't understand the anger because we're not doing enough on guns, because we've lost reproductive rights in this country. If the Supreme Court haven't been able to codify Roe, which has a vast majority opinion that we haven't gotten paid family leave, we haven't gotten dental, vision, and hearing in Medicare, which is overwhelmingly popular. We haven't gotten a minimum wage increase. And people look at this, these are 60-70% approval issues. These are not issues that are polarizing. And you guys haven't been able to act. And then they see, well, they get all this PAC money, they get all this lobbyist money, they're trading stocks, they're going and becoming lobbyists after they do their time. And people are just like, the system isn't working. Now, I was asking someone, I said, how does this relate to other times of history and corruption? Because there are other times where we've had a lot of corruption and then not so much. My sense is that the post-Watergate era, there wasn't as much, but then we had kind of this wealth inequality that just was exacerbated. And now you're living in a time of a lot of corruption in the system.
So you're getting into my wheelhouse, but I do want to go back to process because I think despite all of that negativity, we're trying to be positive and we're trying to do something positive in the world today, let alone later. But I wanted to ask you about that block in the House because, again, I think I'm not sure the Democrats communicated to the country well enough that if the Republicans hold the House, there will literally never be anything done for the American people as long as that's the case.
Nothing of bold significance on things we care about, which is how do you have a house? How do you pay rent? How do you get more wages? How do you get health care? How do you get your college costs met? You can't do any of that.
Yeah, the Republicans would never, ever help with that.
Never, because they want to cut spending, and they want less regulation, they want rest. They don't want paid family leave. They'll channel people's grievance. This is the Trump playbook. Your jobs are offshored, you're not making out, some people have control of the wealth, but they won't actually pass the policies to help. They'll get in and they'll do tax cuts. Their agenda is simple. It's been that for the last 40, 50 years. Tax cuts for the rich, tax cuts for businesses, deregulation.
Yeah. So let's go back to the process for paid family leave. So at least we hold the Senate, the Democrats do. So any senator can introduce it.
Yes.
And then the second step is that Senator Schumer would have to put it up for a vote as the majority leader.
Yes.
So, okay, so if the audience or anyone wanted to help to do that, first they would ask a senator to introduce it in the Senate.
Right.
Then they would ask Senator Schumer to put it up for a vote.
Yes.
Okay, and now 60 votes is not going to happen because the Republicans will block it. So the only way in the world that they could get it past the Senate is to, if it's not to get rid of the filibuster, is to make an exception for the filibuster.
Or maybe there would be 60 votes in the Senate. I don't know if they're moderate Republican senators who would pass paid family leave. I just don't know the vote count on that. And I'm not sure if Schumer's ever brought it for a up or down vote, but that's a vote that he should have.
Yeah, and there has been an exception to the filibuster before. It was to raise the debt ceiling in the first 2 years of Biden's term. So it's not like it's not possible. It's definitely possible.
Right.
They're just choosing not to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions on reconciliation. I mean, on anything financial, they've had an exception to the filibuster. They can expand that.
Yes.
Supreme Court justices, to confirm them, they don't use the filibuster.
Okay, so there are a lot of exceptions to the filibuster. So, okay, that's a giant opening because that means it really is the choice of Chuck Schumer as to whether you use the filibuster or you just call. Is it Schumer? Would he be the sole person responsible for saying we're doing an exception?
Well, no, you'd have to get the Senate parliamentarian to agree with him. Now, you can fire the parliamentarian and find a sympathetic parliamentarian, but eventually it would require a vote of the caucus, a majority vote, to say we affirm the decision of the parliamentarian.
Right. So
you need 50 senators basically to agree to expanding exceptions to the filibuster or getting rid of the filibuster.
Right. Unless you fire the parliamentarian and the parliamentarian says you can do it.
Yeah, and then I don't know the procedures of whether you can overturn the parliamentarian and what votes that takes. I mean,
yeah. Okay, so you're going to get to some degree of procedure, but at the bottom line is there's more than 50 Democratic senators, so you would have to lose Manchin or some of the so-called independents like Sinema, and they would have to raise their hand and say, I do not want moms to get 12 weeks off once they have a baby.
Right, but they won't say that. They'll say, I like this legislation, but I'm opposed to getting rid of the filibuster because then the other side may do it and they'll do something worse. I mean, it's not a compelling argument because we'd pass popular legislation. I don't think the other side will be able to repeal it, even with a 51-vote majority. But that's what they'll say.
Yes. So now let's go over to the House side. So first block is Kevin McCarthy. So somehow magically Kevin McCarthy has to allow it for a vote.
Yes.
And at that point, who's introducing it? Like once we know that he will allow it.
Usually it should be a Republican, and you can find Republicans who are for it. Mm-hmm. It's easier if it's a majority.
Okay. But could a Democrat do it?
Yeah, but then it would have to be that McCarthy would not only allow a vote on it, he'd allow a Democratic bill, and that'd be harder.
I see. Okay, so you need a Republican.
Or at least to partner with a Republican.
Okay. And do you have a sense of how many Republicans in the House would be ballpark moderate enough to consider something that 74% of their own voters want?
You know, at least 20 to 30 members.
20 to 30, that's not bad.
Yeah.
We can work on that.
20 to 30 would. I do believe it would pass in some form. But the obstacle is that they're not going to get, the Matt Gaetz and all will tell McCarthy, if you put this up, we're going to motion to vacate. Well, you'll lose your seat. You'll lose your speakership. We don't want more spending.
And could he put it up for a vote and have enough Democrats support him as a speaker to get past the Matt Gaetz problem?
Yeah, but then he'd lose the speakership next term or lose leadership, so he'd be then a lame duck.
Why would he lose it if he could get enough Democrats to vote with him?
Because let's say he gets the votes this term. Next term, he's going to need 218 to become Speaker if they were still in the majority.
Mm-hmm.
And no Democrat's going to say, next term, I'm going to vote for
Right.
McCarthy. This time he got Gates and all. They wouldn't do it the next time.
Right. That seems like an issue for another day for McCarthy to worry about rather than today.
Yeah.
And a lot of things are going to happen between now and the next term. So would a bill have to be introduced before McCarthy made that concession, or could it be introduced immediately thereafter? Like, is paid family leave basically ready to go?
It's ready to go. The bill is there. There are a lot of bills there.
Yeah.
It's really convincing McCarthy to bring it up for a vote.
So I don't expect you to remember this. I don't remember it. But do you remember if any Republicans voted for it last time around? Probably not, because it was inside Build Back Better.
It was probably inside Build Back Better, and they voted. I don't think we had a clean up or down vote on it, which is something some of us called for. Like, let's take these very popular policies and just have an up or down vote on them in addition to the big bill.
So is it possible for you to find a Republican partner to introduce it as a clean bill? At least and that's another process question. When I say introduce it, what happens if, let's say, you and Jim Jordan, just to make it a hilarious one, right, decided that you guys were going to do paid family leave together? I mean, he's a diehard Republican, so he would never want to help moms.
Right.
But if he did want to help a single average American,
we do a press release. We'd come maybe on your show, it'd get introduced, and then it'd just sit there in committee.
It'd sit there in committee.
And the committee wouldn't move it.
Okay. So the minute that we have a resolution or a bill, then we goes to committee, then it goes to McCarthy.
Yes.
Right? So if McCarthy says yes in a deal, would the committee by definition say yes, or would you still have a problem getting past the committee?
You most likely have the committee say yes. Sometimes the Speaker can also bypass the committees if he really wants to.
Okay. So I want the audience to understand how near impossible it is if the Democrats don't hold the House.
Yes.
So I don't know that the Democrats ever made that clear to people. It makes it seem like, oh, well, it'll be hard, but, you know, and I think the press makes us feel like, well, in the 1990s we used to pass bills.
Yeah, terrible ones, like cutting welfare and cutting essential spending. I mean, those weren't great. NAFTA, which hollowed out the working and middle class. If you want to pass bills, bipartisan bills that aren't going to help the working and middle class, you can do that all day on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah.
You know, if I had proposed a tax cut for corporations, I'm sure the Republicans would pass that. Or if I proposed, as happened in the 1990s, the deregulation of Glass-Steagall so that Wall Street can make more investment banking, of course Republicans will pass that. So, yeah, it's possible to get bipartisan legislation. What's not possible right now is to get bipartisan legislation that helps working class people.
Yeah, for sure. And, of course, Glass-Steagall was repealed in a bipartisan way with Bill Clinton and Phil Gramm. Right. Phil Gramm, who's a deep right-wing Republican, and Bill Clinton, who's a deep right-wing Democrat. That's my opinion. Okay, so you know what? Then let me just start Operation Hope. I mean, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have it up on our website, and it's just as simple as us collaborating with the community and asking them, how do you think we could do this? How do you think we could put pressure on folks, etc. How can we get it done? Do we go to the media? Do we go to politicians? Do we go to the right wing? Do we go to the left wing? Right? How do we do it together? Right? So can I ask then, as a first step, can you begin to see if you can find a Republican to introduce it, just so that it's in a committee, so that if anything goes right, we can go in that direction? I'd love to. We've worked on things before, amendments on $15 wage, I'm on, Nancy Mason and I are on the Child Care Caucus. We could work probably together. I'd be happy to do that. Okay, that's excellent. That's already we're on the board. Okay, we're on the board for effort. Yeah. Okay, so, and remember the slogan is get caught trying. Okay, so, all right, now back to McCarthy, because anybody sitting out there is going to think, nah, it's not. Kevin McCarthy's not going to let you vote on paid family leave, just like we talked about. That helps the average American. It's overwhelmingly popular, helps moms. Republicans have no interest. Right. Unless a mom is like Mom Incorporated. Right. And then, you framed it as a 12-week tax cut. And you're like, wait a minute. But okay, but it's not impossible, right? Because right now, they're shutting the government down. It looks like Republicans
just came back from votes on that, and no progress.
No progress, so it's going to get shut down almost for sure. Yeah. And the Freedom Caucus guys, Matt Gaetz, et cetera, don't look like they're ever going to move. because they're
they won McCarthy's scalp. I mean, they've said that. So they want, when you have no ideology on this fight and just want him to come down. I mean, it's hard to imagine. Maybe they compromise after a few weeks, but right now there's no progress.
So that's good news. The reason it's good news, it's not good news to have the government shut down. It's terrible news, right?
Terrible for troops, for federal workers. I mean, no one should wish for that.
No, of course not. Now, having said that, though, the silver lining in that is that the good news is that there's some percentage chance, and I happen to think it's a high one, I don't know what you think of it, that McCarthy's going to need Democratic votes.
If we can make the case that he's really responsible for the shutdown, because right now they blame Biden as much. I mean, it's shocking. So we've got to communicate better that this is a McCarthy-led shutdown, that Biden made a deal. McCarthy is reneging on the deal. Because if they don't have that, if people just take all of Washington to blame and the president's to blame, then they have no incentive, right? Biden's numbers are down, and they just ride this out and allow the Biden's numbers to keep low.
So there's potentially a couple of different ways that a government shutdown ends. So you're right, they'll blame Biden, and right now I saw a poll where more people blame Biden than the Republicans, which makes no sense at all.
No, it's objectively false, but it's like I was with union guys who give Trump more credit for infrastructure than Biden. I said, you got to be kidding me, Biden passed it. He said, yeah, Trump would talk about it more. And so we thought, infrastructure, we all thought he cared more. Yeah, so the communication, there's a vast gap, which is why I'm doing this with you.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, and a lot of people know, I'm not the biggest fan of Joe Biden.
I know that.
But when it comes to the government shutdown, it's nonsensical to blame Joe Biden. It doesn't make any sense at all. He doesn't want to shut down 1%, right? And it's the Republicans that are driving it, 100%. Okay, but back to the silver lining. So the other ways that the government shutdown ends is it becomes too painful.
Right.
So like the last time when they broke the record, the air traffic controllers said, well, we're not going to come in and
what happened is all of Trump's friends couldn't fly their private planes. I'm not joking. He started getting calls from his New York buddies saying, knock it off.
Yeah. So that's going to happen again at some point. TSA is not going to show up, air traffic controller. If it takes maybe it's not a week, maybe it's a month. If it's not a month, it's definitely 2 months. By the way, our military is also not going to get paid. 1.3 million service members.
It's shameful. Yeah.
Not only is it immoral and shameful, but at some point do soldiers start going, what am I doing here? Why am I showing up for work?
I've said members of Congress shouldn't get paid, and senators.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Is that introduced anywhere?
I've introduced it as a concept. I guess I could introduce it as a bill. Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, that'll be the most popular bill in America if you say, as long as there's a shutdown, people in Congress don't get a dime.
Yeah.
Because why should our troops not get paid?
Right.
But the people in Congress that caused the shutdown get paid.
It's actually shameful.
Absolutely shameful. Okay. But at some point, that's going to snap.
At some point.
Right?
Yeah.
So when that snaps, either the Freedom Caucus has to bend, or McCarthy has to get Democratic votes.
Correct.
Then there's no way around that, right? Okay, so let's assume the Freedom Caucus says, I don't give a damn about the soldiers, I don't care about the air traffic controllers, I'm not taking any flights, I don't care.
Right.
I'm never going to give you the votes.
Right.
Which is entirely possible.
It's possible.
It is possible, okay? At that point, when McCarthy presumably comes to the Democrats because he literally has no other choice.
Right.
Is it possible to say, yeah, maybe we could have a deal if you give us paid family leave?
Yes, but we'd have to get the Senate, too.
Yes. Yeah. But by the way, maybe he gives you the deal because he doesn't think it's going to pass in the Senate.
Yeah.
We have it passed in the House.
We've had that happen before. We've passed it in the House before.
That's right. You passed it before.
Yeah.
So maybe for McCarthy, it's a low-paying deal because he gives you a vote you're not going to win in the Senate.
Yeah.
And then we leave it to TYT, see if we can pass it in the Senate.
Right.
Does that sound like a deal?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can get McCarthy to need Democratic votes. And that, I think, is something that the community watching can mobilize around with the Democrats, because we're the ones who are going to listen most to you, is what are the 1 or 2 priorities you want if there was a deal? What is it paid family leave? Maybe what I'm hearing. Is it something else? What's an achievable one? And don't say Medicare for all, because that's not, I'm for it. But you need Bernie as president. You need a progressive as president. But things like this that Biden has run on, that are part of the Biden agenda, what can we push for?
Yeah. So I totally agree with you. You got to be practical. So like the whole country would love to end gerrymandering. That polls around 90%, right? But the Republicans would never agree to that because that's the only way they can get a majority in the House. So it's not realistic, right? But paid family leave, where it's 74% of their own voters agree.
Right.
It doesn't get any more realistic than that. Is it possible to ask for two things? Because we'll come up with a second thing.
We should.
Right?
Because maybe we get one.
Yeah. All right. Great. You know what? That'll be the second thing we do on
Right.
Operation Hope. Come up with a second ask.
Right.
And we want it to be popular with Republican voters, because the good news is
there are a lot of these policies that are.
Yeah. I write about it in my book, and tons of these policies are very popular, not just with Democratic and Independent voters, but with Republican voters.
Yes.
So those are totally possible. Maybe one of your anti-corruption measures.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, Republicans definitely don't want to pass those either.
They don't.
I'm not sure a lot of your Democratic colleagues want to pass
Unfortunately,
those.
not.
Yeah. So maybe that's a little bit unrealistic. We'll come up with a second one. So, okay. Now let's assume one more thing then. So that's for this next year or so, while, we still have the Biden administration, the Democrats still have the Senate, they have the White House.
Right.
Now let's talk, and we know that in 2024, if Trump wins, nothing is possible. That's it. 4 long years of our lives are wasted.
Or they're going to try to put people like Adam Schiff possibly in jail, right? I mean, it's going to be ugly.
And Mark Milley, and
who knows who else.
And he's promised people in the media. He said NBC, MSNBC will put them in jail. And a lot of people think it's hyperbole, or it's not.
No, it's not. I mean, our system may thwart it, but it's going to be chaos.
Yeah, and they're not joking. They
he's
definitely
got a grudge.
mean it. Yeah, and Steve Bannon's not joking, and they're going to bring in their shock troops, and they literally call them shock troops, right? And so this is good. So paid family leave, higher wages, any kind of public option, any improvement in health care. If Trump wins, it's over.
It's over.
That's another 4 years of our lives.
At least, and who knows what damage? Because after Trump, I know it's unclear whether we'd say, okay, now finally we want a progressive, or maybe we'll say we just want someone to clean up this mess, and then you're not going to get a Bernie Sanders like progressive elected, right?
Yeah.
So he's a real jolt to the system.
Okay, now let's assume that a Democrat wins in 2024. Okay, but you still need to win the House and the Senate to pass things. Otherwise, the Republicans are going to still bottle you up.
Yeah.
And you're going to need a couple of miracles for them to shut the government down, and need the Democrats for a vote to reopen it back up and squeeze 1 or 2 bills in. So that's why the House is essential for the Democrats.
Right.
If you don't have the House,
you need the House, you need the Senate, you need a trifecta.
You need the trifecta, yeah. Which
is what Roosevelt had. People keep saying, why can't we do the New Deal? He had overwhelming trifecta. Why can't we do the Great Society? Johnson had an overwhelming trifecta. Why can't we do the Reagan Revolution? Reagan didn't have it. Reagan had a Democratic House. So that was a different time.
That was a different time, but I'll tell you, it's the overwhelming majority in LBJ and FDR is also a little. It's not exactly right. The analogy is not apt, because remember, he passed the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act, and he did not have a majority.
Fair
for
enough
those.
on that.
Yeah, he had Dixiecrats who, under penalty of law, didn't want to pass.
I don't want to underestimate his skill in that.
Yeah, and so I think a really strong president who actually pushes for these things can get things passed these days with bare majorities. But the times have changed. They can't pull a Reagan and pass it with Republican votes.
because that's it. Reagan's tax cuts were very popular, even though they were wrong, and he got Democrats to vote for it. Paid family leave is very popular, but we can't get Republicans to vote for it. I guess the difference is the Speaker was probably allowing these Reagan policies to come for votes. Tip O'Neill was willing to negotiate with Reagan in ways that McCarthy's not with Biden.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to look back for just one question, because you and I have talked about it on the Young Turks many times, and we've agreed, we've disagreed, we've had a lot of stuff. But looking back on it, should we have done single bills when the Democrats had the trifecta?
We should have.
Yeah, like paid family leave.
We should have still done the congregate one because we needed that for reconciliation, and you can only use reconciliation certain times. But we should have just done it to get people on the record.
Yeah. Was it? Do you know if it was that the Democratic leaders were worried that Democrats would vote against them?
I think they didn't want to embarrass their own colleagues if it wasn't needed.
Well, it's often sorely needed, and that's one of the issues, of course. But I don't want to get you in too much trouble.
No.
Okay. Okay. So, kidding aside, though, let me go to one last thing here. So you helped us a lot with the process. Now we know the roadmap.
Yeah, no, it's
and people never talk about it, right?
But it is the hard thing. It's why governance is so hard in this country. It's actually really, really, really hard for a bill to become a law. Like you need a lot of things to work.
Yeah. So let me ask you about actually two things. I'm going to ask you about personal stuff in a second. It's just fun, right? But the last substantive thing is, how often do progressives get together and strategize? How often do Democrats get together
Once a week,
and strategize?
we have an executive board meeting of the CPC.
And these days
we have a caucus meeting. The caucus meeting is more informational, but once is a caucus every week, once is a progressive group every week.
And everybody shows up?
A lot of people show up.
Yeah. And these days, since you guys are out of power in the House, what do you strategize about?
Let's make sure that we don't give in if we do have a deal with McCarthy to even a penny of cuts beyond what we already have. How do we make sure that we don't make that compromise? Now, we could talk about how do we get some of our values. What can we do to make sure we're getting our values in executive orders that the president's announcing? How can we do better in communicating what we have done? What can we do on immigration to push back against sort of draconian policies and make sure that the White House doesn't adopt the right-wing frame?
Okay, and on the messaging, I think most people are aware, you said it earlier in the discussion, that the Democrats are not great at messaging.
We're not out there, we're not communicating with the volume, speed, interest, vitality that we need to.
Right, and so in the old days, people would do press releases and press conferences.
Doesn't work.
Doesn't work at all now, right?
Doesn't work.
So,
it's a yawn.
Yeah, since that doesn't work at all, is there discussion about how do we get our messaging to resonate in this new environment, this new world?
That's the challenge. I mean, I think so much of it is viral now. Social media, online, how do we get that and be active there? And I think that is one of the challenges with the White House. I mean, Biden has been a much better president than I would have thought. He's been more progressive than I would have thought. But the communications actually isn't even where Obama's was, right? I mean, there's not a modern day communication strategy.
Yes. So it seems like in order to get anything these days to be noticed, there needs to be a little bit of conflict.
Right.
So are you ready to say that Marjorie Taylor Greene is against moms?
Sure, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. And Biden is taking on now Marjorie Taylor Greene. He's ramping it up. But I agree with you. I think you've got to take on the fights with big oil, big pharma, the health insurance industry. Take on the fights against the millionaire, billionaire class that is hurting the working class. And Biden did it. I think with the UAW strike was a great one where he did it. We need more of that.
Yeah, and by the way, as I said on the show, you were on the picket line,
yes,
and you asked President Biden to join you.
I was one of the first to ask him.
Yeah, and it made a big difference, and he did come out.
He did. Rashida, me, Debbie Dingell. That's a place where progressives push. We got a good result.
Yeah, wonderful. And so, okay, so we'll work on the messaging, right?
Yeah.
And I'm curious if if the caucus is more open to different kind of messaging, and different styles and different outlets.
If your community has ideas, send them to me. I do think we have a problem there. We've got to figure out how we break through.
Yeah. Okay, last thing on that then. So if you were to call out Republican colleagues based on their, not generally, millionaire, billionaire class, everybody does, and it's kind of at this point.
A cliche.
Yeah, so, or at least expected, right? But if you were to say Representative Don Bacon, although he's kind of a modern, I don't know that you want to alienate him, you might need his vote on paid family leave, but Representative Jim Jordan or whatever, here is his donors.
Yeah.
And so on this vote, he is selling out to his donors.
Right.
Would that create any kerfuffle in the House, or would that be at this point like Tuesday, right? Pretty normal.
I think it depends on the member, but you certainly could call them out. Yeah, I mean, you could call them out in a campaign setting. I mean, there's rules in the House of what you can say on the House floor.
You can't imply that they might be corrupt because they take corporate campaign contributions?
You probably could. I mean, I don't know the exact rules, but you could certainly do it in some context.
Okay, all right. Now the fun stuff. So, especially given that you guys are out of power, what does a regular day in Congress look like for you these days?
Well, you have these kind of strategy meetings, Progressives Caucus, you've got votes, you've got committee hearings, you have conversations with the press, constituents, that's a day.
Okay, and so the committee hearings, okay, that makes sense. I get it. And you bother to put together proposals, which I suspect most don't.
Most don't. I try to still put legislative proposals, look for where we can get bipartisan consensus, try to figure out how you can pass things or at least move the conversation. My view is just even Medicare for all or political reform, ban PAC money, lobbyist money, stock trading by members, term limits for members, term limits Supreme Court justices. It gets people used to the idea then if we do have a trifecta, boom, there's the plan.
Okay, all right, I love that. Does anybody in Congress ever hang out anymore? Like in the old days, they used to go for drinks, Republican, Democrat, didn't matter. And it sounds fun, although they probably did some terrible things too. But okay, but these days, do people go bowling together? They go for drinks?
But they'll have a lunch together, drinks together. Yeah, less so on both different side of the aisle.
So yeah, is it ever different side of the aisle?
It is, but usually when you're traveling, if you're traveling with members to in a codal to some foreign country.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. So, but within your caucus,
less. There's probably less than it should be.
Yeah, but does like Raul Grijalva ever call you up and be like, "Ro, come on, let's get out of here. Let's go watch a movie."
Not a movie, no. Maybe a drink.
A drink. Yeah. Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds fun. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for doing this, Ro.
Thank
Appreciate
you, Cenk.
it.
Thank you for you keep this. Project Hope is needed. I'll just say this. Your viewers, this is not the time to be apathetic. I'll end with this point. The miracle was that Bernie Sanders came as close as he did. He would have been the nominee after Nevada if they didn't do all of these things of getting everyone to drop out. We're going to have a progressive future in this country. And people don't realize how close we are. And the dam's about to break on the establishment control of the party. This is not the time for folks to give up. It's the time to double down and demand that we become a progressive party.
All right, Representative Khanna, one of the few strong progressives in Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.